Okay, we are back with the reaction series that you've all not been waiting for. It's me, your favorite one more brown, the one more browniest, Richard Brown. The best at starting videos every time. It's nothing but success. So I was hoping to get back to watching this Keith Frankish interview about illusionism that I started. Well, gee, I guess it was a week ago. But I was out of town for some family things, and then I'm still wrapped up in grading. I'm almost done, so I'm almost officially done with my summer classes. I should be done in the next couple days, but I figured I'd take a break. It's raining outside, no chance of going to the skate park. Um, all pouring rain. So okay. Anyway, with that being said, I think I have it queued up to where we were here. This is an interview with Keith Frankish. I think I mentioned I know Keith, I know his work. I'm not really a fan of illusionism, but I do take it seriously. I do think that it is misunderstood by a lot of people. And I think actually that's the fault of the illusionist to a large extent. That is misunderstood is because of the way they present it. So we'll see what they were just about to get to that because where I left off, they were talking about Dennett and his legacy and Keith's special relationship with him. Um, and that's all good stuff. But okay, so they were just transitioning to the illusionism stuff. This guy, I think his name is Tevin. Is that his name? Tevin. Um, Tevin was just saying consciousness is an illusion for the brain by the brain. Typical Dennett kind of quote there. So let's jump right back in and see where they head with this.
And I know in one of your papers you said, if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, just let me know. You say that if it's an illusion to think consciousness is an illusion, then you are not disillusioned.
Yes, I did say
Has,
that.
has that held true since we last spoke?
Yes, yeah.
Wait, what? Wait, what was that?
Say that if it's an illusion to think consciousness is an illusion, then you are not disillusioned.
If it's an illusion to think consciousness is illusion, then he's not disillusioned. Okay, that's too clever for me. So if he's mistaking and thinking that consciousness is an illusion, then he won't be cured of that mistake, basically. I don't know. Okay, anyway, let's go on.
Yes, I did say
Has,
that.
has that held true since we last spoke?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm always in with the caveat that it's a certain conception of consciousness that we're talking about. I'm not saying that we're not conscious in any sense, obviously. Yeah. We're not unconscious, we're not in a coma, we're awake and we're perceiving things and we're aware of things and we're vividly aware of the world around us and of our own bodily condition. And of course we are. Yes, I'm not suggesting for a moment that people that our ordinary talk of seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, being in pain, feeling pleasure and so on doesn't capture anything. Of course it does. It captures one of the most essential things about it. I'm just denying a certain picture of what that is.
Yeah, see, this is the part where things get confusing because he's on the one hand saying, look, he's obviously not denying that we're conscious. He's just denying a certain picture of what it means to be conscious. But then he goes on to say, well, that picture is that there's something that it's like for us, which is the central notion of what phenomenal consciousness is. Phenomenal consciousness is there being something that it's like from your point of view, something that's like for you. That's what consciousness, in the most important sense of that word, according to me, is. So they sometimes it sounds like they want to deny that, and other times it sounds like he's not denying that. So that's where I waffle on the view. Not really sure what it is that they're denying. If you construe what it's like talking a certain way, then I would agree. We want to get rid of that. But if you just construe it in this kind of innocent way, there's something that it's like to be us. There's something that it's like to see red. There's something that's like to feel pain. Then I don't really see how you could deny that or why think it's an illusion. Okay, but let's see how he's going to develop this.
Which says that it involves immediate acquaintance with mysterious mental qualities that are somehow produced by the brain.
Hmm.
Now,
Right? So that's the picture that he wants to deny, is that there's immediate qualities which are produced by the brain. Now, once again, on my view, see, and I dabble in theories of consciousness. I have a theory that I sometimes play around with called the horror theory, the higher order representation of a representation. And it's related to higher order theories, obviously, with some bells and whistles. And I think that, one of the benefits is that it explains why consciousness seems this way to us, why it seems like we're presented with some sort of direct acquaintance with mental qualities. I mean, for my own view, I think the first instance, consciousness seems like we're acquainted with things in the external world, but through introspection, it could come to seem like those are properties of my experience. But saying that it merely seems to be that way isn't to be an illusionist. So there is this distinction between weak illusionism and strong illusionism. Strong illusionism says that the very notion of there being something that is like for us is an illusion. Weak illusionism says, well, there's some aspects of what it's like to be us which aren't accurate. And so this direct acquaintance with mental qualities may be one of them. But that's not strong illusionism. It's not the sense that's going to get you out of the heart problem or do any of the other things that these illusionists want. So for my mind, there's a middle ground where you can say, yeah, of course, maybe it's not exactly true that we have this direct acquaintance with these mental qualities. But at the same time, it certainly seems as though, in my opinion, it seems as though we have this direct acquaintance with mental qualities. Okay, anyway, so that's just me flapping. Seems I was bit by a mosquito recently. I'm itchy, but okay.
Maybe Keith, define it, because you're not saying consciousness is an illusion. You are saying a concept of your perception or thought or idea of consciousness is actually the illusory issue.
I'm saying that there's something that happens when we attend to our own experience, when we think about our own experience, that induces us to adopt a certain picture of what it is to be conscious that is deeply misleading.
Yes.
And that there's something about this, when I say we attend to our own experience, I could use the word introspect, when we sort of look inwards, or we pay attention to how it is with us right now, what it's like to be us, if you like to use a phrase. There's something about what happens then. And what does happen then is a very, very interesting question for cognitive science that produces this, if you like, this, or tends to induce us to endorse this view of ourselves and the nature of our experience that I think is deeply flawed and misleading, and we could call an illusion, because there is this deep tendency for us to endorse this view. It's not that this view is one that it may be that you don't endorse the view until it's presented to you by a philosopher. Perhaps it has to be articulated, but once it is articulated, it gets a great grip on us. And I think there's something about the nature of introspection itself that makes us susceptible to this picture, even if we don't pre-theoretically articulate, even if we don't articulate it to ourselves until we get to do some philosophy.
So that's a perfectly harmless claim. So before illusionism became a big thing, there was just, regular physicalism. Physicalism says that mental qualities or consciousness are physical things, properties of the brain, some physical property of the brain. And maybe they don't have exactly the character that we take them naively to have in introspection. And for all that Keith is saying right here, you could just be a type B physicalist saying, well, yeah, so there's consciousness and it's just not exactly as it appears to us. That's weak illusionism. That's not strong illusionism. So I don't really hear him saying anything that should really be qualified as illusionism. In fact, I think that almost everybody who has a theory of consciousness has to endorse some form of weak illusionism. Even the dualists have to endorse some form of weak illusionism, because consciousness just doesn't have all the properties that it seems to. Okay, anyway, so maybe let's see if he's going to clarify this, because this is what annoys me. This is just regular physicalism so far that he's talking about. There's nothing really distinctively illusionist about this.
So the picture is that there's if you like, an irreducibly, what I call an irreducibly subjective world. There's that my being conscious involves there coming into existence a world that is just for me. Okay? That that is somehow distinct from the world that we share. There's the shared world with all the things in it that we can all communicate about and point to and identify and agree on the features of. But then there's this private world, which is how that outer world is, as it were, rendered and presented to me internally. What the outer world feels like for me, where me here is a bit unclear, because it's almost like there's an inner me that is, it's not just the physical me, but there's a sort of inner me aware of this inner world, which is how the outer world is rendered for this inner me. So there's this irreducible subjective world, and no one can know what that world is like. They can guess it from their similarity to me, from the things I say, the organism, from my behavior, from my attempts to describe it and so on. They can speculate about it and guess that it's probably like their own to a large extent, but they can never actually detect it. There's no way neuroscientist or any form of cognitive scientist can examine this world, can directly detect its properties. And it's a mystery how the physical brain produces it. Some people may think it's not physical at all, that it's an immaterial soul. Others think that it's something that the physical brain produces, but that is more than just the activity of the brain. It's some creation of the brain, and its relation to what the brain is doing is very mysterious. This is
wait, hold on.
The hard problem. How does the physical?
That's not the hard problem, I would say. The hard problem is, why is there consciousness associated with this particular brain state as opposed to a different one or none at all? So the idea that it's something over and above that brain activity, that's a dualist idea. That's not part of the heart problem. The heart problem may be used to motivate certain forms of dualism, but the heart problem isn't associated with dualism. It's just the recognition that we don't have an explanation for why some particular brain process is associated with some particular conscious experience. So why the brain process associated with seeing red feel like seeing red as opposed to tasting chocolate. We don't have an answer to that. There's nothing dualistic about that. So I think there's a bit of bait and switch right here.
Public brain, the objective brain, in fact, produce this subjective world.
I mean, it's clearly, in my mind, it's undeniable that there's subjective conscious, subjective experience, that there's experience of the world as the world presents itself to me. I also think that could be physical, could be just some property of the brain, a pretty physical property of the brain. So I don't see any reason to deny that there is this thing that Keith is here talking about. And I don't think it leads directly to dualism. So, I mean, some people think it does. I don't understand why. The failure of imagination on their part, I would say, but that's a different story. So, yeah, I don't know what the problematic aspect of this picture is supposed to be.
And I think there's something right about that picture. The brain is doing something that involves representing the world and creating a perspective on it, but it's not creating this radically separate realm of reality.
So he's just denying dualism. So it's so hard to get a grip on these guys, because he just admitted that the brain is bringing into existence a perspective on the world. There's something that is like to have that perspective. If there weren't, then it would just not be a perspective on the world. So there's something that it's like to have that perspective. It's got to be. But that doesn't entail dualism. See, what Keith wants to deny is dualism. And you don't have to, he wants to deny the conception of consciousness that leads, he thinks, to dualism. I don't see why we would want to make that move. Let them have that conception of consciousness and argue that that can be physical. That's my strategy. So I don't understand this desire to try to deny it and then try to say so what's left over? What are you talking about? It's a perspective. There's some kind of, it's not another realm, it's just the brain. That's what physicalism holds. So yeah, this is frustrating for me to to see regular physicalism supplanted by this kind of claim. So far, there's nothing really radical about what he's saying. He's just presenting physicalism, saying all there is the brain, and then there's consciousness too. So there's a certain kind of, if you think that consciousness is a non-physical thing, then they're denying that. They're saying that's the illusionary aspect, that it's somehow non-physical or not explainable by science. That's just weak illusionism. So, okay, maybe they'll say more. Let's continue.
That's the illusion. It's the way we think about what the brain is actually doing, which is, again, it's like the Descartes thing, we shouldn't think of, it's not wrong to talk about us as having a subjective perspective on the world. It's just wrong to conceptualize it in this inflated way as a separate realm of reality. So we need to remove that picture, but then replace it with another picture of subjectivity that is less metaphysically inflated and that is more tractable, and that we can begin to understand and theorize and gradually unpick using the tools of cognitive science.
Yeah, so he's just presenting physicalism, so, and weak illusionism. So the idea that the seeming non-physicality of the consciousness is an illusion, which everyone who's a physicalist would agree to. I mean, that's what the phenomenal concept strategy and all these things in philosophy of mind, that's what they're all aimed at. So the radical notion of illusionism is that subjectivity doesn't exist. That's the only way you get out of the hard problem. If there's anything like something that it's like for you, then you just have the same question. Why is this brain process associated with that perspective or that presentation of the world, as opposed to some other thing, or no presentation of the world at all, in the way I assume it is in a self-driving car? Well, look, in a self-driving car, I don't think there's any perspective on the world. There's kind of an awareness of the world in some sense. It navigates just fine around the world, but I don't think there's a perspective on the world, because there's nothing it's like to be the self-driving car. So the difference between what my brain is doing and what that self-driving car is doing is the source of the hard problem. That's all that you need. And it doesn't drive you to dualism. It just drives you to this, well, we need a theory of what's going on here. But so this is the waffling bit that I'm worried about with Keith. It's like he starts off with this thing. Illusionism is the idea that phenomenal consciousness doesn't exist. Phenomenal properties are illusionary. But then by the time he unpacks what he's saying, he's just saying regular physicalism. There's nothing exciting or about that. That's been known for 50 years that you could be a physicalist. So I don't really see the benefit of illusionism. It creates more dust, doesn't clarify anything,
and thereby integrate ourselves more with the shared world, so that we're not separate from it but part of it.
Yes. I mean, it's when I listen to it, I often think I know exactly what you're trying to say. People are really just not listening to what you're saying. They're not taking it in. Similar to what we were talking about with Dennett's paper on qualia. They're really dismissing it, but not really understanding exactly where you're trying to come at it. And I think the first time we spoke for about 3 hours, and if nobody really understood, I think they should really go back and watch that, because we went into...
I didn't know there was a first one. I guess they mentioned it earlier, but there's a lot of things on this guy's channel I guess I'll check out.
Quite a lot of detail. We spoke about the ethics, the ethical implications, how some of my work, I also helped defend a little bit of it, and there's so much backtracking. I feel your pain. I don't even know what else to say except I feel your pain. And because when I try to speak about it with colleagues, or if I try and have the conversation with other philosophers or professors on this channel, I see immediately the misunderstanding. And
there's no misunderstanding, at least. Look, so these people are not misunderstanding. It's you guys. If they are misunderstanding, it's because of the way you guys are presenting it. So is consciousness real or not? Does it exist? You say no, but then you say yes, but then you say not in the way you think. So it's the confusing way that it's put, which causes people to become confused. If all you're trying to say is that consciousness is not non-physical, then you don't need all of this hubbubaloo about illusion to make that point. There's I wish someone would feel my pain, because this is quite frustrating.
And it's difficult because I sometimes don't want to play devil's advocate too much, and I also don't want to defend someone else's view too much. So I find myself just letting them have that misunderstanding, because this podcast is not about me having an argument or a debate with people. It's to let them explore their ideas. So that's what this episode's about. While we're talking about these misunderstandings, let's Robert Kuhn just released that paper, the landscape of consciousness. I think it's a perfect time to talk about this, because this would be your way to sort of give us examples of where people's illusions are coming from, or where their illusory opinions of their version of consciousness might be. He broke it out into monisms, idealisms, panpsychisms. He referenced you as well at some point.
I mean, I read that paper. I thought, it was pretty comprehensive, but he only talked about famous people, and specifically people that have been on his show. Like some of us were left out. Although he did cite the paper I wrote with Ledoux, but that's Ledoux's ideas. Anyway, okay.
There's many points where he actually referenced you and cited your work. Anything you want to say about that paper first before we begin? I'm going to chat to Robert in about a month or so.
So fantastic. To be honest, I've only skimmed it so far, so I will need to. I'm going to read it again much more carefully. And so I won't.
5,000 words, Keith. It's crazy. It's 175,000 words. It's crazy.
It's rather long. It is. But so I won't start digging into that, because there's so much there. And let me just say two things. One thing, I think I'm convinced of this, that whether or not the sort of view that I have, you have, and Dan had is right, it's a view that's worth articulating and offering to people for their consideration. And I think once people do consider it carefully and comprehendingly, I think they will find it attractive. But there's a bigger, now this is what you were saying, there's a big communication problem. I think I've got the picture. But as you saw just then, I was struggling somewhat to articulate it.
Yes.
Okay. And I was qualifying it partly because I'm aware of the things that people will say. So I'm trying to say something that is fairly bold and clear to put across the structure of the view, but at the same time being careful trying not to make it too bold so that I overstep and deny something that I don't want to deny. It's more a matter of a reconceptualization of things. So it's not as much a denial as saying, again, as I said before, like free will or whatever it might be, it's not saying it doesn't exist, it's saying it's not what you think it is. But trying to get this, and it's a change of perspective. And if I can get people into the right position to look at it, they will see for themselves what I'm trying to say.
Do you think that maybe you should have considered Nicholas Humphrey's slight twist of the word? I mean, into phenomenal surrealism, because I think that might have been a good move now in hindsight.
I think that's good, and I think it's a useful part of the technique. I worry though that
you wanted magicism, eh, or magicalism?
So just before they go into magicalism and all that stuff, which I think is cool, if all Keith is trying to say is that consciousness is real, but it is physical, and there is something about introspection that leads people to think that it can't be physical like the other stuff around us, then that's not really a new view. That's the phenomenal concept strategy. So what would be different, I guess, from the illusionist perspective, is that there's some other mechanism by which they explain why it is people come to think of it as not explainable by physical science. The phenomenal concept strategy says, well, we have these phenomenal concepts and they don't have any descriptive content. They're some other kind of thing, like a pointer, but not really, like a demonstrative, but not really, etc. Like a quotation, but not really, whatever. So, something like that that's more direct. And that's why it sort of seems like we can't get a descriptive hook into the phenomenal concept. And therefore, people tend to think of this as non-physical. So if illusionism is just like, well, we have a different explanation about what it is that makes people think this can't be explained physically, but consciousness is real, there is phenomenal consciousness, it just is not what you think it is. It's not this ineffable, private, um, intrinsically non-physical property. Then that is a view, I guess, worth articulating. I don't really know what other mechanism that they have. All they said is introspection does this. At least the phenomenal concept strategy points to something and then articulates it. Excuse me, points to something and then articulates that. It's the way our concepts work. So that's something else that's always bothered me about illusionism. It's like, what exactly is new here? I thought the new claim was supposed to be that phenomenal properties don't exist, that they're illusionary, that we think they're there when they aren't. But that's not really what Keith has been saying. What he's just saying is, yeah, those things are there, but they're just different than you think they are. They're not non-physical, and that we conceptualize them in the wrong way. So, I waffle back and forth between the view that illusionism is either like patently absurd and false or banal and trivially true. So I don't know. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I like Keith. I know him personally. He's a nice guy. I respect his work. But I just can't, like, I don't see what they're saying that isn't what has already been said, namely physicalism, with some explanation for why people think you can't explain it physically. Myself, I prefer the identity theory. These things are just identical to brain states, and identities don't get explained. They're brutes. We always are left kind of scratching our heads about identities. So you don't need illusionism to do any of these things. I don't know what it adds really, except anger and confusion. I don't know, but that's probably me. Maybe I'm one of these guys who has a misunderstanding. I don't think so, though. I've talked to a lot of illusionists and spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. So I don't know.
They did. Because I like this idea that, again, this quotation from Lee Seagal, a writer on magic that Dan used so often, with the distinction between real magic and magic that is actually real. Real magic being the magic that wizards and people in stories do, in fairy tales do, and magic that can actually be done, the sort of magic that Penn and Teller do. So I would like to say that consciousness is magic, not in the first sense, but in the second sense. It's a very, very clever trick. And the point about these, they both have the same effects, really. They both create the same effects on us, on the observer. Whether it was done by real magic or done by Penn and Teller magic, it still looks like there's some body floating in midair, say. Okay, and the power of nature, of evolutionary processes, to craft the stage magic type of magic, and to convince us that things are, that there's real magic in the fairy tale way occurring. I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of nature to craft those kind of magical effects for its own ends, which is exactly what Nick talks about in Soul Dust, which is some subtitle is The Magic of Consciousness. So he did initially like this notion of magic and illusion, but his worry, and I share this worry, because his worry, I think, is that the magical effect, the effect that we use phenomenal talk to describe, is something very real, and it expresses something very important. This is the thing for Nick. When we talk about what it's like, we're expressing something very important. We're expressing how things affect us, their significance for us, how we react to them. He talks about it's not the perception of red, but but reading.
Mm.
The sensation of red is a response to a certain kind of stimulus, to red stimuli. It's our take on those things. It's what it's the significance that red things have for us. And I completely agree with this. And it's something I'm trying to develop in my current work. And so if you like,
But all those don't escape from the phenomenal talk. I mean, look, Dennett's original idea was that it just beliefs, that there's nothing really going on internally until a person says, look, I see red. And then that's just all there is to it, basically, is the states that led up to that report. So if there's anything else, then you still have the hard problem. So why does red affect us in the way that it does? Why does this brain state, which represents the redness? I mean, I know Nick Humphrey's work, so I know that I actually think I reacted to one of his talks and I had the same sort of issues. It doesn't explain why that couldn't be done by a different kind of state. Yeah, okay.
When we talk about what experience is like, we're talking about how it impacts on us, how it affects us, what the complex multidimensional significance that it has for us. And I was going to say we experience the experience, but we're aware of this, if you like, as a sort of condensed essence of significance. Okay, so we encounter the world as packed with significance, because what it's doing, the shared world is bombarding us with stimuli. We are reacting to those stimuli in multiple different dimensions, cognitive, emotional, physiological, all sorts of different dimensions. Many of these reactions are not actually overt, they're just sort of subtle changes in our expectations, in our tendencies, priming us to respond to the next round of stimuli. And I think we have a sense, and this is what introspection gives us, a sense of how that unfolding reaction, this complex multidimensional reaction, of how it is unfolding at each moment. And that's what we're gesturing at when we talk about what the experience is like.
Yeah, so even if you buy that, this sense that he's talking about is something, there's something that it's like to have that sense. So that's all that you need to get the hard problem going. You haven't really diffused it or made it less mysterious by saying these sorts of things. So either you're left right back where we started, which we want an explanation for this. They can still be physical. It doesn't push you towards non-physicalism, but it doesn't dissolve the hard problem either by doing the sorts of things that they want. To really dissolve it, you have to get rid of all of this stuff. Which in some instances I thought Dennett was really trying to do, but in other instances he backs off that. So this is the waffling, the shuffle that they go back and forth between.
We have a sense of the condensed significance of this stimulus for us. Nothing here that's essentially private. It's all due to mechanisms of sensitivity and reactivity and monitoring of those mechanisms, but it doesn't come to us in that way.
So he says it's not essentially private. So that's great. So it's physical and therefore accessible from the third person. And maybe they are committed to that. Even you could have some sense of what sense that person is getting of all this stuff. So that doesn't get you out of this problem either, right? None of these things that they're doing get rid of the hard problem. So I don't see why you'd want to go around saying it's an illusion as opposed to this is what consciousness is, and then describe it in these positive terms, which is a respectable thing to do.
To us as a sense of this is what that stimulus means for me. And that meaning, that expressive, that expression of our response, that's perfectly real. Okay, so when this reading, that is perfectly real, that response is real. And this is why Nick doesn't like to talk about illusion, because he thinks the stuff that I'm describing as the talk that I construe as referring, let me say this again, think about the function that talk about what it's like about phenomenal consciousness. Think about the function of the talk. Now, he agrees with me, I think, that, and with Dan, that the function of that talk isn't to track mysterious mental property qualities that are directly presented to us. That he will agree is an illusion, but he thinks it's tracking something else. This the expressive, the significance of stimuli for us. It's expressing that significance. It has an expressive function rather than a descriptive function. It's saying what this means for me, and that is perfectly real because it does mean that for me, and that's why he doesn't like to talk of it as an illusion. And I agree with him that in that sense it's not an illusion.
Have you read Sentience, Keith?
I have, yes, and which applies this framework. I need to reread that, which applies this framework to the questions about the distribution of consciousness in the natural world, and suggests.
Yeah, Humphrey says mammals and birds, basically. Rough.
That it's there's an important distinction between cold-blooded and warm-blooded creatures.
Yes,
Nick is full of wonderful ideas.
Dan actually gave that book very high praise.
Yes,
that was Nick's the closest he's ever gotten to giving a perfect definition of consciousness, in his opinion.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I strongly recommend it.
It's very good. Enjoyed it.
I've said some. I think I said some nice things about it as well in print. But the illusion talk isn't addressed to those people, as it were, to the people that Nick's addressing away. It's addressed to the people who want to take, want to construe phenomenal language in a different way and build metaphysical edifices around upon the basis of phenomenal realism.
I mean, look, the problem with this whole way is that Keith is very concerned about physicalism. So that's great. We all want to be physicalists. I mean, all of us who want to be physicalists want to be physicalists. But the way you construe consciousness is an epistemological issue. And it takes an argument to get from there to whether it's physical or non-physical. So, there are many stopping points. And this is why I like my Chamby argument, because it just says, look, I can conceive of that thing being physical. There's no contradiction in it being physical. It may be hard to understand how it could be, but it's not contradictory. So we don't need all of this worry. We want to capture phenomenal consciousness in the way that it seems to be to us. And then we would like to understand how it could be physical. Yeah, that'd be great. But if we can't, that doesn't mean we jettison the way that it seems without good reason. And really the only reasons that we're ever given for why we need to jettison it is because it leads to non-physicalism. I mean, there's no other reason for rethinking the way that consciousness seems to us. So if you're not convinced that it leads to non-physicalism, there's no reason to rethink it. So, people like Ned Block who think that they're an identity theory between these mental qualities and some states of the brain, there's no motivation to endorse a kind of illusionism because there's no worry about non-physicalism. I mean, I personally don't think you should be worried about metaphysical views when you're talking about how to characterize consciousness, because it's like they're trying to block off certain routes before they commit to saying this is what consciousness is like. If it leads to non-physicalism, then it leads to non-physicalism. I mean, I'm skeptical that it does, but it's like I don't want to redefine consciousness just so that it fits with my metaphysical preferences, which is sort of sometimes I get the feeling what Keith is trying to do. Yeah. All right. I don't have much more time here to be doing this, flapping too much.
And I think those people are chasing an illusion.
Okay, well,
and it's important to say that it's important to be quite robust about that. We have to get rid of the false pictures. So Nick is focusing, I think, on building the positive picture. I'm focusing more. The illusion talk certainly is designed more to get people to drop the bad picture. But I see them as complementary for that reason.
I think, okay, so let's do this, Keith. Let's try and frame this a little better so people understand. There is the illusion problem, of course, which we have to address. But there's two things I want to bring up. One was you've been working on what's known as the reactivity schema theory, which I think we should definitely cover at some point. or unless you would like to do that first, and then like sort of build our way up.
Whichever way you want to do it. What are you going to? How are you going to continue there?
I think, look, let's address the illusion problem. Oh, sorry. The second thing that I wanted to ask you about was the last time we spoke, 2021, you said you were going to write a book, Descartes' Prison. Do you remember that? Is that
I do
still
remember that.
something? Is that still something in the making, or
It absolutely is, but I've
title? Have you decided on a new?
I think I might. That's the sort of working title, but it's something I was going to say to you in relation to this problem of getting people to see the view for what it is. I've continued to write more or less technical pieces for journals and collections of papers about illusionism. And the reason I've held off trying to write the popular book